Good morning and welcome to the North San Diego Business Chamber's virtual event, An Uncomfortable Conversation About Race. My name is Deborah Rose and I'm the President and CEO for the North San Diego Business Chamber, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to the first of a series of important dialogues that the Chamber will be hosting. And now I'm going to introduce you to my colleague, Janelle Lucero.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a este evento virtual acerca de las conversaciones incómodas sobre las razas del North San Diego Business Chamber. Mi nombre es Janelle Lucero y como gerente de los Emerging Leaders, es un placer presentar este primer diálogo de esta serie importante tocante a la diversidad e inclusión. Today's event is being presented by the Chamber's Emerging Leaders, a group of young professionals that are our future leaders and captains of industry. We all see the world differently based on our education and upbringing. Today we have an opportunity to address the past and discuss the future of diversity and inclusion, even when doing so is uncomfortable.
Thank you, Janelle. The format today will be informal. The first hour will be designed with a moderated discussion amongst 6 panelists, and the last 15 to 20 minutes will be set up to answer questions from you, the attendees. Please put your questions in the chat feature on the upper right-hand screen, and with time permitting, we will get to many of those questions. Today is a time to listen and ask questions without fear of judgment. We encourage you to really hear what our panelists are saying, and if you don't understand something, ask. They're here to answer the questions. Thanks to our partners SDG&E, Qualcomm, and Littler, this dialogue will be the first of a series being brought to you quarterly. Please enjoy this 30-second message from Qualcomm, one of our chamber partners.
We're just getting started. My name is Gwynn Williams, and I'm the Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity here at Qualcomm. For over 3 decades, Qualcomm has been changing how the world connects and communicates. Diversity sparks our ingenuity, and inclusion is the key to our innovation. We're proud that our inventions and philanthropic efforts have helped define the present and shape the future. And the best part is, we're just getting started.
Without further ado, it's time to introduce our moderator, Mitch Mitchell, Vice President of State Government Affairs and External Affairs with San Diego Gas and Electric. Before he comes on screen, please enjoy this short video, short partner video with us from SDG&E.
Today we are at our 7th Diversity Summit. We have over 400 people right here at San Diego State University and the most amazing ideas floating around inside those buildings. I think it's a time for us to really get together as a culture and recognize that there is something that makes us special.
This event is such a great event because it really brings all these people from different backgrounds. How we champion people is to create that curiosity that allows to learn from each other.
Well, statistically, what we do know about some diversity and inclusion, right, is the more diverse team you have, then the more impactful your team is, and the more better performance you have within a team. So I think it's relatively important that everyone should have some practices around diversity and inclusion and implement those in their team.
It's a privilege to have a whole team that's providing this whole curriculum of things that you can attend to learn about, if it's identity, if it's immigration experiences. It's just really just bringing people together and helping them be their most authentic selves, their most productive selves, their happiest, best selves at work.
And without further ado, we want to introduce Mitch Mitchell, our moderator for today. Mitch, I believe your sound is off. We can't hear you. You're still on mute. Mitch?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay,
All right.
hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Mitch.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. I couldn't hear anything, so I appreciate it for the help. So wonderful. It was wonderful to have everybody attend today. My name is Mitch Mitchell, and I am the moderator for today's session. And I would like to make an opening introductory comment about the importance of today's discussion, and also give you a brief personal message. Today's conversation is important because, again, it is a continuation, a necessary continuation, and a conversation that is uncomfortable for many, but also about a situation that has gone on for far too long. Here in the United States of America and across the globe, we always talk about the importance of progress, and in particular with regard to race and diversity. And the horrific events that the nation and the world witnessed in June, and the killing of an African American black male on video, really opened up a space for discussion, and it also opened up a connection. And the protests that followed were amazing to see, but also they were sad to see, because we were having the same conversation again, which is, why do we continue to see this happen? In my job at SDG&E, I'm proud to be the Vice President of External Affairs, because I get a chance to get out and be in the space and talk to people and explore thoughts and opinions. But one of the things that I cherish most is to be a leader in the company around the issue of race and inclusion and diversity. And I will say this, and as before I introduce the panelists, these conversations are really important because as a black male in my 50s, I remember the first time I had a horrific encounter with the police department. And it was when I was in college. I was running around in a car with my best friend, who's also African American, and we were pulled over one afternoon by a police officer. And the next thing you know, we were surrounded by 7 police cars, because we supposedly fit the description of bank robbers, and a bank robbery that had happened within the hour. We were taken out of the car, a gun was drawn on me, we were frisked aggressively, the car was searched, and then we were sent on our way. The feeling of anger and violation, was raw for the rest of the day and the rest of the week. And I actually connected with my best friend a few weeks ago and said, "Do you remember that day?" And he said, "I remember it like it was yesterday." And one of the things that we've talked about is that the only way that we can progress as a community, the only way we can progress as a region, is through conversation and understanding and being open-minded and talking with an open heart. And so with that, I will introduce the panel that is going to join in on this conversation and help us with this understanding. First up, I'd like to introduce, and for everybody attending, you can look at all the panelists' bios online, but I will introduce them by name and then bring them on camera. First up, I'd like to introduce to the panel, Miss Alicia Gwynn. Alicia? She should be joining here. Hi, Alicia, how are you? Next up, I'd like to introduce Fred Nasseri. Next up, I see Fred is joining. I'd like to introduce John Pack. Welcome, John.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Next up, I'd like to introduce Mrs. the Honorable Olga Diaz.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Olga. Next and last, I'd like to introduce Kelvin Diaz-Reyes. Kelvin?
Yep, I can hear
I
you.
don't see you popping on the screen. There you are, Kelvin. Wonderful, good to see you. So this is our panel for today's discussion, everyone. And again, we want to welcome you all to this important conversation. And I want to thank you for your interest in this dialogue and also the progress that we all will agree needs to occur. So we will jump right into this discussion. And what I would like to say up front is we're going to be gathering questions from the side screen. And what we'll do is, before we do that, if you have a question, remember, I think, Deborah, you've been told to go into the chat box and to introduce your question. And I will open up the panel discussion first of all with one question that is important for the panel.
Mitch.
And the topics of today's questions will include tolerance and biases and conflict of conversations and the fear of misspeaking. Because again, one of the things that we realize now is this is an uncomfortable space, and this sometimes leads to uncomfortable conversations, which halts questions. But today, hopefully, we will create a better understanding of how to approach this. First of all, for the panel, let's start this with the first question for the panel. And we're going to try and get through several questions, so we're going to ask the panelists to be impactful but concise. What do you think are the biggest barriers companies, the business community, must overcome to truly embrace diversity and inclusion? And what is your suggestion, one suggestion that you would recommend that truly exemplifies a better inclusion? And before everyone starts, I will say this. One of the things that I have been really impressed by in the business community is in the public statements of large companies across the country, Coca-Cola, Ben & Jerry's, been some great examples, Procter & Gamble, because what we now are facing is a moment where businesses have to be the barometer for change. Businesses have to be the beacon for change. For so many years, we waited for government to fix this situation, and it has failed to do that. And so this first question is really about what are the biggest barriers that companies must overcome going forward to truly embrace and exemplify diversity and inclusion? Alicia, you're the first person I brought up. Let's have you start.
Well, I think for one, let me just say this. You know, we can see today that racism is being challenged socially, politically, and economically. And I think, you know, some of the barriers are, you know, education. You have to be educated with racism. You know, education with interactive training where people can see themselves, where they can really have a true, honest conversation along with counseling, because I look at racism as almost alcoholism, because when a person is addicted to alcohol, they just don't put the bottle down. They go through therapy, so, you know, sessions and stuff like, and I think even with racism, they have to be trained, and it has to, along with some counseling, because there are really a lot of people that are really staunched in racism.
Yeah, you're right, Alicia. And I think that, again, it is, once it gets started, you know, some people don't want to stop, and some people don't know how to stop. You know, let's take that question. And Kelvin, you work for a big company. What is Qualcomm and companies like Qualcomm, what do they really need to do to truly be exemplary in their embracing of the need for diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier would be sort of being inviting to diverse people. I think that's the biggest challenge we face. Having a good reputation with different cultures, different ethnicities, different races. But yeah, the biggest barrier would be is sort of gaining that reputation amongst employees, but also amongst the people in the outside and seeing, oh, what is really love to work there? There's a diverse set of people that work there. They're talking great things about, you know, inclusivity, not just on one location, but all locations, which shows like the leadership really focusing on this issue and sort of implementing practices to fix that.
You know, and thank you, Kelvin. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I was looking down and I just realized that Alicia Morrell, I didn't see if she joined, but I'd like to make sure that she has her camera on. Alicia Morrell, are you on?
Yes, yeah, I am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, hi, Alicia. My apologies. How are you?
No worries, no worries.
With Whitler Mendelson. Alicia, I'm going to actually take this question to you, which is, you have a specialty in your day-to-day life with harassment and on the legal side. You see corporate cultures because you see them through the legal lens of when something goes wrong sometimes. Talk a little bit about what businesses need to do to truly embrace and absorb and adopt a culture that really is about diversity and inclusion.
I think that one of the things that we initially think in moments like this is that we need to hire more diverse people and we need to increase the diversity of our staff and our employee group. And there's a lot of value to that. We know that in every space, the more diversity you have, the more we have the opportunity to learn and develop and grow from one another. And that improves the quality of our work and the product that we bring to whoever we're selling our product to or whoever we're doing our work for. I think one of the largest challenges that we have, and something that we're definitely going to need to start thinking about now, is I have to put my ego away, because if I just hire a bunch of diverse people to come to my company and work, there might have been some systematic problems that prevented those diverse people from being hired in the first place. And if those things aren't addressed beforehand, or if they aren't addressed at the same time that we're hiring diverse people, then what we're doing is inviting people of color and people who are of diverse backgrounds into a place that still might be subject to systematic racism, to systematic problems. So in order to do that, we have to take really serious looks at ourselves. What does my organization look like? How can I put my ego away and figure out what we need to do to solve it, so that when we do increase the diversity in this space, that we have also created a welcoming environment that lets us all move forward and thrive.
You know, that's a great lead into the next question for some of the other panelists, Alicia. It is, you talked about systematic racism and a culture that you build. It isn't just about adding diverse faces. There's much more to it, and often, and for this next question is going to go to John and Olga and Fred. And the question that really pops up is that have each of you faced systematic racism, and what would you say the biggest cause of systematic racism is, in your opinions? Because sometimes, as Alicia said, it's not about hiring people. It goes back to what I said, which is, if you don't have an open communication and conversation where you're educating all the employees about what's going on, then systematic racism can just be pervasive because no one's ever stopped and challenged it. So let's start with you, John, about systematic racism and ultimately, have you ever faced it? And what do you think are the main causes in business?
You say, John? Yeah. So there's only two parts to this. As I was thinking through it, one is that I am a very optimistic and positive person, so I tend not to get caught up with those limitations. And to be honest, I just learned about the systemic racism in the past couple of months or months plus that we've been dealing with this. So one thing that I wanted to so say that I have been impacted or I've been affected by systemic racism in the past. I'm not sure about that because I really haven't put too much attention to it. So now the second part, which is how I am able to move on without having to get caught up in these different limitations. And this, I'm hoping that to the emerging leaders, this would be a good point, is that regardless of the limitations and the barriers and what the system has put in place to limit you to thrive, work yourself around those barriers. So see what has given the other people the advantage over you, because it didn't happen overnight. It could have been a multiple, barrier taking you to a point where you find yourself limited and advancing in your career or leadership or whatever you're pursuing. So try to find what are the different things that the rest have been able to obtain and you have not, and work on those areas so you can bypass those barriers. So yeah, I'm not going to be saying that I have been affected by systemic racism because I, like the same way I don't believe in stress. I just tend to see the solution more than anything else.
Okay. Before I move on to the next panelist, if you are not speaking, if you could, because there is feedback and the audience that's trying to pay attention can hear things. So if you're not speaking, please push the mute button. You know what? Let's take this question to Olga Diaz. And I have to tell everybody on this call that I have admired Olga for many, many years. When she first got elected, I went and sat and had breakfast with her and learned a little bit about her. And she's both run a business and she's also had to have the task of running a city. And Olga, I think it's safe to say that you probably have some opinions on systematic racism and what you've seen and what we have to do to be better. So Olga, please.
Sure. For context, for those of you who don't know me or my story or what I'm doing here, I am the daughter of immigrants. My parents came from Mexico for a better life. When I was born in this country, my mother was actually undocumented, and that was the 70s. Maybe things were different, but that's the reality of my life. English is my second language. I grew up poor, and I know exactly how lucky I am to be right here, right now in this moment with these wonderful panelists. And my experience growing up with a family that came here out of courage and out of necessity and faced barrier after barrier. I mean, I grew up with it. I watched it. I watched my parents be talked down to. As a very young child, I had to be the translator because now I knew 2 languages, even though my parents hadn't caught up yet. There came a point where they couldn't help me with my homework anymore. So I had to sort of make my own way and then, of course, help other people around me. And so I just from that context, I'm very aware of when somebody's being mistreated or held back or not welcomed, right? I've felt it, I've lived it, and I've overcome it out of sheer determination. Good people in my life helped me, librarians, teachers, good people helped me see where the doors were and helped me walk through them. And when I think back on my life and who was most instrumental, there's always a person I can name, a mentor, a teacher, somebody who helped me. And in many cases, those people were not people of color. They were white people in an environment, and they saw an opportunity to help an eager young person. So I've had, sort of that, the path has been hard, but I've also been fueled by wanting to overcome that. And so systemic racism, I have 2 jobs. I am a city councilwoman. I'm finishing my 3rd term, 12 years of service. I was elected in Escondido as the first person of color in 120 years. So I carry that title, and with it the responsibility of making sure that I did everything right, that I was smarter, that I worked harder, that I understood the content, everything from public finance to labor negotiations to infrastructure. I had to be really good, and it wasn't just about me, it was about making sure that everybody after me wouldn't be held back if I was not perfect. So I do have a chip on my shoulder about, knowing more than everybody because I had to. Otherwise, they would have ridiculed me more, right? And it wasn't without ridicule as it is. I encountered people telling me to go back to Mexico. I'm a US-born citizen, educated, productive. I own a home. At the time, I owned a business. I currently work at a college. So I've had these experiences of being told that I'm not good enough or less than. And one of the parts of the question was, where does that come from? Where does that racism come from? And I think it comes from fear of not understanding, fear of not recognizing that we're all equals and human. And so there's always this idea that anybody who's different than you might not be good. And that may be biological. It may be something you learn from your family members. I'm not entirely sure the source, but we have to overcome it. And one of the ways we overcome it is by calling it out, being uncomfortable with it, and then showing compassion when you do find somebody who really wants to change or really is curious, make that an easy conversation for them.
No, and you're right, Olga, that's such a great point to end on is make it an easier conversation. And that's what we're going to get into here in a few minutes in the panel. Before we do that, and Olga, I will say that there were nights that I would watch, there were days I'd watch meetings that you were a part of in Escondido, and it would break my heart. I say that to you as someone who knows you because there's a level of ignorance that exists in society that leads to these statements and this ill will, and then so you mentioned that sometimes it's a fear, and again, these conversations are important. We all have to also acknowledge as panelists that some people were not going to change, but I think the majority of society we can. So let's talk about you and your experience, because you obviously are a business owner, but as Olga says, sometimes if you don't look like everybody else, you may experience a level of systematic racism. And want you to talk about your experiences with systematic racism and also your advice going forward on how we address it.
Me, Mitch, Fred. I came from a country that I was born that it was a majority Muslim country, so I was a Jewish guy, so I always stood out. And no matter what, you were that Jewish guy. And I felt being different. I was treated differently. So my dream was come to the United States. And when I came to this country, I saw the difference. In order, for us to understand prejudice and racism, and I'm sitting in here about honor, I'm looking at 5 different backgrounds. And I have had the experience of seeing the United States from outside and coming in. I think one of the things that we miss in this country is education, as Dr. Alicia said. We miss education. We have taken education away from our bases and our roots in schools. In our schools, you're not teaching them about other cultures. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about just talking about it. I'm talking about geography. I'm talking about having these kids going in there after high school and going to the poor neighborhood and getting educated and doing some community work in order to understand, comprehend, and to see what is happening out there. If you take a rich kid, and I'm not saying it being rude, I'm just being frank. If you take this rich kid has never had any problem and send him to the poor neighborhood to see what the other kid lives with and does with, and he has to deal with it every morning, then you're going to open up another barriers. When you want to hire them, when that stigma exists that you don't know about them, with lack of knowledge come ignorance. With ignorance come fear. With fear comes stupidity. And I think once you open up the door and we start teaching this young kid, we are forgetting the fact we cannot start at middle level. We should go back to our roots. We should go back to the roots of school and start teaching, educating, and learning each other, teaching each other from education. Because once they come to the power of hiring, they have the knowledge and the background to hire.
Fred, that's a wonderful statement you made about the education aspect, because I will say this to all the panelists. I've often said in meetings that it is hard for people to understand what some of us have experienced because they have never been in those situations themselves, but also because they probably have never interacted with people who look like us. And so it's hard to, I've said if you only hang around a certain group of people, upper income, Caucasian, along the coast, you're going to have a view of life. But when you go in and you say, hey, listen, we're going to interact and we're going to put some different perceptions and faces and thoughts into these conversations you're having, sometimes it's really uncomfortable because they're like, whoa, wait a minute. And I've often said in government in particular, and Olga, I will point this out to you, because I think sometimes in government, the failure of government is when you have people who've been elected who don't understand that there are socioeconomic differences amongst the population they govern. There are ethnic differences amongst them. It's that you can't really govern and handle problems if you don't step back and become educated, as Fred said, about what life is really like, and that is a struggle. So that leads me to this next question for the panelists, and that is, some people want to talk about these issues, but they have a fear of talking about them or sounding racist because they ask questions that come across wrong. And we've reached a point in life now where what's telling the story is video. Sad but true. I've said this all along. Everybody should be giving a great thought to the fact that the iPhone has become the tool that is most valuable in this decade, because it is what has led to this unearthing and ripping the bandage off of this hidden problem of racism. Because without video, and I'll say this before I ask the panelists a question. I said to a friend of mine the other day, boy, we've seen a bunch of videos of late in the last month and a half, brutality during protests, obviously the video of Floyd, but think about all the stuff that we don't see. That's probably actually scary. So let's talk a little bit about this discussion of racism, because I still see people who say, well, this is racism. I mean, those protesters were out of control, and it's about the looting. And then there are others who say, well, I want to ask a question. I just don't know how, because I don't want to sound ignorant. I don't want to piss anybody off. So we'll start this question actually with Alicia. We'll say, Alicia, what is the best way to start a conversation about racism that is really a question and a conversation? What would you suggest?
Now there's two Alicias here. Now which one?
Oh, you're right. I apologize. Let's start with Alicia Morrell, because Alicia, Gwynn, I have a different question for you. Alicia Morrell, let's start with you.
So I think there's, as a person of color who fields a lot of questions, there are some people who want to ask a question because they want to fight. And I think that quite often we understand who those people are. We can tell based on their body language and the way that they're asking the questions and the words that they're using. Right now, because it is ever present, because I'm stuck at home, because I have nothing else to do, I've been watching the news a lot, and there's sometimes where I just need to conserve my resources. And so I'm not necessarily interested in engaging with people who really just want to fight and really just want to dig their heels in and get me to the point where I'm going to say, you know what, you're right. Racism isn't a thing, and I'm sorry, I'll back off. I am much more interested in being a resource to the people in my life and to the people that I work with and to the people who I might work for who are interested in having those questions. And I understand that sometimes you're afraid you're going to say something that's going to make you sound uneducated or something that is ill-informed, and so that might prevent you from stepping forward. The first thing I think is that's very helpful is that you don't have to ask that question first. You could always go to the internet first. There are so many resources that we see right now that you can really do your Googles about things, and that might be a good first place to start, because Google's not going to be like, that was a dumb question. They're going, Google is going to potentially, put you into a place where you can find some of the things that you need. And you do have to be an excellent consumer of that information. Is it vetted? Is it by someone who is educated? Or is it by someone who is also just at home with really strong opinions, whether or not they're ill-informed?
Sure.
So I think that,
it's funny you said it. Yeah, that makes sense. Although I hope that you're right. If I ask Alexa a question on race and Alexa says that that's a stupid question, I'm going to remember that you told me that, at least.
Well, I'm just hoping that Alexa and Siri are a little bit more compassionate educators than that. But I think the other thing that's really important to know, especially if you are a white person, if you are afraid of asking these questions, is that you need to really think about the person that you're asking this question to. If you are thinking, oh, I know a Black person, so I'm going to ask them this question, how well do you know this person? Is this someone that you would go to for other things? Do you have conversations with them? Are they really in your life, or are they just a person of color that you know? Because it's possible that maybe that's not the right first person to talk to. Maybe you need to have conversations kind of in group first and refine your question, or find that you don't need to talk to a Black person to understand the validity of a Black person's pain. In that respect, maybe you just need to do more listening. But, I try to be an open resource. There are some times where, people ask questions, and then you just have to figure out how to control your face so that you don't relate to them that they just asked a wild question, and try to maintain that openness. And I try to extend as much grace as I hope to get in that respect.
Sure. No, that's wonderful. And that's a wonderful answer. And you're right, the controlling your face, because we have to be careful. I think it's hard for people to understand when we let our emotions show, then all of a sudden I'm an angry Black man, or you're an angry Black woman, or an angry Latina. And it's not fair, but that is what comes to mind. So, let's continue with that question for one more panelist. Kelvin, I know that I've found myself in my own company in the last month and a half, having conversations with the other African-American employees in the company, right? We're talking about what does the company need to do better to make us feel better and to show progress. But realistically, the question about how you introduce this conversation to everybody is a big one. Kelvin, talk a little bit about what's going on in your mind as it relates to you work for Qualcomm. How should this conversation occur? What's your advice?
I think, first of all, leadership should acknowledge the issue. Whether they sort of agree with the issue or not, I think is more on the less relevant side. I think acknowledging the issues for that employees do go through this systemic racism, they are disadvantages to certain people, and sort of offering help and, comfort to those people, sort of like a sanctuary for them to speak and discuss their problems within the workplace, not just outside, is very important. But yeah, I think leadership is where it starts, so everyone can see it. Everyone's exposed to this issue.
And then the discussion that follows, I think, should be inviting to everyone, and everyone should assume good intentions, as our Glenn Williams from Qualcomm has said, that we should approach the conversation and assume everyone has good intentions with asking, and not act offended when they ask something that seems that a non-educated person in that, that subject has been asking, because we don't know their background, just like they don't know ours completely. And we should have a more productive conversation by everyone assuming good intentions, and then discussing those uncomfortable questions within the workplace and not just outside like we're doing now.
I agree with you. And before we move to the next question, I'm going to interject something. What's been really hard for me in this moment that the nation's going through is, I will admit, I'll be the first to admit, and I've told my family this, I have a much smaller social circle today than I did at the beginning of the year. And in part, there is this anxiety within me, because I've seen some people that I used to socialize with regularly who are out protesting wearing a mask, right? They're just downright upset, and they're down in the corner standing shoulder to shoulder. But yet when we have this conversation about racism and systematic racism, they don't want to talk about that because their civil liberties are being violated because they have to wear a mask. And I don't get upset by it anymore. I just realize that my holiday card list is much smaller today than it was last December. But you know what? But I have to say this. Sometimes I think these are people who've never experienced it. They've never experienced this feeling of racism. And I think some of them have looked at me and said, "Really, Mitch, you've experienced it? What are you talking about? How can you, look, you work for a big company." And I always say, doesn't matter where I work or how much money I might make, I have a fear every day. I have to be careful about things. And this next question is going to be aimed at Alicia, Gwynn, and at Olga, because there's often a belief that once you reach a certain height in life, that you are immune from this discussion of racism. You're immune from any of the things that people are talking about. And for those who are listening to this, Procter & Gamble, in my opinion, did one of the best jobs of any big company in the country. They created 2 commercials. And I would advise all of you to go Google Procter & Gamble, The Look. It's a great commercial, because The Look is about what people of color experience when they walk into a room where they don't look like everybody else. And there's this question. So let's get into question 4 for Alicia and Olga. And the question really is, have you experienced any barriers in your career advancement due to bias? And I'm going to frame it for both of you. Alicia, when you grew up, when I say grew up, you grew up and you've moved through life, and you and your husband were household names. So people would assume that, well, there's no way that Tony and Alicia Gwynn ever experienced anything racist. There's no way. I mean, they were immune from that. I mean, they could go anywhere they wanted, and so it just there's no way that they had experienced. And then Olga, for you got elected. Everybody's like, well, obviously there's no racism. Olga got elected. There's no way she's experiencing racism. Talk a little bit about that question of the experiences that you had that will disprove that, yes, it doesn't matter how high up the ladder you go, there's still this element of racism that does exist. And the look.
I actually think it gets worse. That's absolutely untrue. Let me tell you, most of my adult life while Tony was playing, I lived in fear. I lived in fear for my children. I raised my extended family too. And when my son used to ask, "Can we go walking down the street?" No. 3 little black boys walking down the street, you're gonna get stopped. And that is a fact. When I opened my business just for the young people to train them and learn, and they would be out in the back alley behind the warehouse, just sitting down eating, and every time, never fails, the police would come and harass them. And so, it's a mother's worst nightmare when your child, you're hoping in the back of your mind that your child never gets stopped, because you see all these things going on, And I remember the day it happened. My son, Tony Jr., was in college, and he got stopped and put to the ground because apparently they were looking for someone who had a car just like him. I mean, my worst nightmare happened. I never turned my alarm on because my brothers, Tony and I was helping raise, we were scared that the alarm would go off and the cops would come up and go up in there, which they did one time. So that is absolutely not true at all, because even when we went to the minor leagues, I think, seems like everywhere I went, I was the only African-American or Black wife there. And I remember that they would always pose the question like, you people. I said, you mean Black people? I said, and so, you experience, and I experienced it a lot in baseball, in the minor leagues. Tony wasn't there long, but the part he was there, I experienced it. So, I have to overcome just like the rest of them, and sometimes I get a chance to educate them about my culture. But yes, we experienced it more so than any, because they don't want you to have anything. And I remember going to Southeast San Diego because that's where I got my hair done. And I would drive a car and they would always stop me and say, are you selling drugs? How did you get this car? And then I give them my license and they see the name. Oh, sorry, Miss Gwynn. And I said, it doesn't matter who I am. If you stop me for no reason at all, that's not right. So yes, we've experienced it, but we've had to overcome it. So don't think that just because we've had the privilege, and I'm smart enough to know that a lot of times we were privileged just because who my husband was, it wasn't because they liked me. Okay.
Yeah. But you were privileged, but you weren't immune from what was happening. Yeah.
At all.
Right. So Olga, before I go to you, I say this again, for those who Google, Alicia, what you're talking about, I'm getting stopped and pulled over. That's why the commercial that Procter & Gamble did, the look, so important, because you had that look, so it pulled you over, right? So Olga, talk about it. I mean, everybody would say the same thing is, well, Olga Diaz got elected to city council. I mean, there's no racism. I mean, she never experienced racism. I've heard many stories that you and I have talked, but I'm gonna let you chime in on this.
I've probably experienced more racism in my life since I moved to Southern California than I ever did when I was born and raised in Northern California. So maybe also I would say it's evolved in Northern California a little more, to where I didn't realize how bad it was until I came to Escondido. And that hurts my heart to say that, because I've made a life here. My husband's here, my kids are here, my house is here. This is where I'm staying. And so I got elected in spite of my race. I was advised to change my last name. Of course, Diaz is my maiden name. My husband is a white cop. He's retired now, but his last name is Griffin. And I was told if I changed my last name, I could get elected. I was told I was too young. I was told, people would say to me, I'm never going to vote for a woman. I'm like, where the hell did I move to, right? I mean, there are things that just in my lifetime, in my time in office, I have experienced that I had only ever read about or seen in movies until I came here. So there's, we've evolved, but it's not over yet. But my husband, I mentioned, I've had the benefit of marrying a white man that, in the comfort of our relationship, I've been able to ask a lot of questions of him as a white male, as a cop, right? Like, why do you do this? Why do you eat that? Why do you say that? Why do you think that? And he's had that same, benefit of being able to ask a person of color. So I found it to be very therapeutic, that it deepened my knowledge of the why, and also helped me navigate the, how to, manage the look or understand when somebody needs a little bit more context. But in my life still today, if I'm at the store and I need to get my phone out of my purse, I do that in plain view of the cameras in an aisle. I'm not like just digging through my purse next to a shelf or whatever, because I'm afraid of being accused of stealing. And so I put myself in a highly visible place just to make sure I'm not going to be judged that way. So, and this is a deep-seated weird thing I've never told anybody before, but that's what I do. I have a brother, and when he was getting ready to drive, I remember saying, okay, now if you get pulled over, slow down, put on your blinker, and wait until you're in a public, highly visible place before you stop, right? Don't disrespect, don't run, but like wait till you get off the freeway to the parking lot of a store or where somebody will witness, right? Because you need a witness when you're afraid of law enforcement. So again, I find it a little therapeutic and ironic that I ended up marrying a cop, because now I've seen firsthand, and I will tell you all and tell the world, you are your own best advocate. Just because law enforcement has a badge or a uniform, they are not individually smarter than you are, right? They're still people. And like any other industry, you got people that are excellent at their job, people that are okay, and that people need to move on. And it's in that move on section of the law enforcement industry where there needs to be more focus. Other things as an elected official, there's race baiting in politics. It's used as a weapon to prevent people of color from being elected or succeeding. I experienced it a few months ago when I was running for higher office, right? The idea that on a mail piece, they put a person of color, not even a picture of me, but a picture of somebody who's supposed to represent someone like me, and said I can't be trusted, that there's an element of insurgency to somebody like me. This is a common theme in politics, and it works. This is the infuriating part. It still works on maybe, wealthy people or white people. So I say question the motive when you see something like that. Don't support it. Don't indulge it. Don't reward it. But it takes a certain level of awareness that it's happening. So
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's not over. So I got elected, but I still face racism.
Yes.
People still.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, Olga, it's funny. Get to the next question, but I have a friend who's a former San Diego Charger, and we were having a conversation about 3 weeks ago about, and we live near each other, and he was acknowledging that, Mitch, I don't walk my dog late at night unless I have proper identification, and I'm dressed proper, because guaranteed I'm going to be pulled over. I'm going to be stopped during my walk, and it's a fear that I have. And so, Olga, you're right, and I think that you still have to deal with this, even though you've been elected. You still have to deal with it, and the race baiting is incredible. I had to explain. My wife is white, and my daughters are mixed race, and I had to explain to them there are things that I cannot do. There are places that I will not go after dark because of the fear. It doesn't matter how much money I make, what I wear is important. If I'm wearing a suit and tie, I feel safer. If I'm wearing a hoodie and jeans and it's dark and then I'm at risk. And as Olga, as you mentioned, when you go into the grocery store, Alicia, you would agree, you probably had this conversation with your son many times. No sudden moves if you have an interaction with a police officer. That's the worst thing that you could do. So let's go to the next question. This question is for Fred and for John. Racism is not only limited to whites against people of color. It's prevalent in other things, in other ways, in socioeconomic structure. And I want to ask, actually, I'm going to ask you this first part of this question is, how has your background shaped who you are today first? And then we're going to get into the racism is not only about whites against people of color, but talk, John and Fred, first about how your background has shaped who you are. Fred, we'll start with you.
As I said, I came to this country at the age of 16 because for years I suffered being Jewish in a Muslim society. And sitting here listening to a lot of these, I saw myself in that window, in that picture, in that, being kid, not being able to walk in a certain restaurant because specifically a certain restaurant, no Jews, no Christians, no dogs allowed. So when you face something like that, and as a young kid, you get beaten up simply because being Jewish, you begin beaten up, and then come to the United States. And I want to say there's something in here. We talk about racism in the United States in general, but I want to say something in here. The United States is the only country I've seen that is willing to face its growing pain. It's the only country that is not afraid to talk about it. Yes, we do have a growing pain. Yes, we have our issues. Yes, we have our racial issues. But in a country that's 330 million people, 340 million people, we are going to have that. We have so many cultures. So I want to say that because I think this country has given every one of us an opportunity to sit in here and talk about it. And I'm grateful for it. But the same token, I think the issue of racism that I face and every one of you have faced, it comes from the fact that again, we go back to the fact of ignorance and the fact that we did not know. When I came to this country, I was looking for freedom. I have become one of those guys that cannot see colors. I refuse to see faces. I can see human being because I saw it myself. I went through it myself. And does that make me authority on racism? No, but I think it makes me a human being. And I think if one of us, every one of us is going through that, you have that. In my business, I have 10 different cultures. And that, to me, is one of the best things I've done, not only for myself, also for other people, because one of the things we do in my business, I make sure that they talk to each other about their culture. And I've had culture in my business that have been so different from each other. In the beginning, they wouldn't even talk to each other. I have white, I have black, I have Muslim, I've got Christian, I've got Jewish, I've got Russian, and I have Chinese, I've got Vietnamese. And in the beginning, they wouldn't even talk to each other. They hated each other. Now they're best friends.
Yeah.
But one of the things is, I think, when you're talking about how we can overcome it, again, I go back to education.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Fred. John, let's go to you. And then as we go to John, I want all the panelists to think about this next question, because before we open it up for the audience questions, I think it's important for the audience to know this, and I was putting the intro into it, and each of you will answer quickly and concisely on this one, because again, racism isn't just limited to whites against people of color. There are other biases that take place, and the question that you're to all answer is what do we have to do to educate, truly deeply educate people to break this barrier that we have today, and to train people about tolerance, and so all the panelists will answer that. But John, let's get back to the question before the panelists answer that one, of your background and how it shaped you and for this discussion today. Sean.
So thank you, Mitch. Yeah. So you know, I'm Korean. I was born Korean, but I was raised in Chile. So I speak Spanish is my primary language, surprisingly. So, you know, moving to Chile at a very early age, we lived in a small coastal town. We were the only Asian family. Yeah, so we stuck out like sore thumb and just waiting at a bus station. The bus would stop in front of me, and it's like they were watching a zoo, you know, an animal or something. They were like, "Oh, look at that Chinese" or something. So I grew up in that kind of environment. It's not that they had bad intentions, but I was just very rare in that community. So that's where I grew up, and you know, from elementary through college, that's where I lived. And that also, of course, exposed me to a lot of different cultures, and I was very thankful to grow up in an elite side of the Chilean society, but I was always very interested in learning about the rest of the country, so I got to mingle with people from all different socioeconomics and education levels and politics. I mean, it's a country where you have, you know, a big gap between the haves and have-nots. So that always shaped me into have an open mind, and I always encourage everybody to go and visit other places and travel and travel and travel. Even if it's within your own country and state and city, I'm sure a lot of us have visited different parts of this city alone. Alicia earlier mentioned going to the south. East San Diego. I don't know if you guys have been there, but you know, you can learn a lot just by walking into any store, to a bank. It will really shock you to learn so much within your own city. So that's how I've always had an interest, and I embrace diversity a lot. We have here at Bring Balance, it's like a United Colors of Benetton. I really appreciate that. And right before the panel, we had a staff meeting, and I had this conversation. Say, guys, I want to know your opinion. If there's anything you would like me to address, I would like to get your input. So they all feel appreciated. They all felt listened to and included in this kind of conversation. So what was the second part of your question, Mitch?
Just that's basically how it shaped your experiences. That's it. So.
Oh yeah, no. The other one was internally, like this is really important. I remember now. So within the Korean American or Korean society or Indian society, there's a lot of discrimination. There's racism within, and amongst ourselves, people of color, we can have different biases and prejudices. So that is something we always have to be proactive. So I have been privileged to have a lot of mentees for a very long period of time, and people doing internships with me and such. And when even just recently, some of my Asian American friends and I've been opening up this thing about after, of course, George Floyd's death and everything. I'm like an activist, and I've been very vocal on social media and such. And I've been putting a lot of pressure on them. Yeah, saying, hey, silence is being complicit. Do you guys know what's going on? Are you bringing this topic to your family? So I'm always continuing. So someone's got to be proactive. The fact that right now we have 200 people listening to this panel, it means that they all have an interest in learning and having this conversation. So we have to be the engine of change. So whatever culture, whatever society you are in, initiate that, be the spark. Yeah. So create that little curiosity, because if they're not approached to it, if it's not being affected in their lives in any form, it might be a little hard to change. So it might be uncomfortable, but be proactive, open up, be honest, have a very, of course, a private conversation. That might not want to offend them, but we need to do something to stop this from being passed to the next generation.
Wonderful. So that's a wonderful segue, John. I appreciate it, because now what we're going to have is everybody answer this question briefly. We have 5 minutes left in this portion, so I want to make sure that the audience listening, truly as a follow-up to what John just said, there were questions that came in on the chat portion that were, hey, how do we actually achieve the progress that we need to, where people understand that we may look different, but we're all human, and we may look different, but there's no room for racial intolerance, because we all think and we all have opinions and we all have personalities, we all have emotion. And how do we build that, not just in the workplace, but starting in schools? And as John just said, we have to carry this forward. So can everybody answer that question concisely? I mean, how do we do this so that it's meaningful and it sticks? We'll start this time with Kelvin, with you, and again, concisely answer this for the audience. So I think what you guys say in this part will help with the next portion of this conversation. Kelvin, start with you.
I think the most important on the subject of tolerance is the fact of not dismissing other people's views. When they ask questions, is why is this conversation not about everyone? Is that person really understanding the prevalence of, say, racism against people of color? But essentially, we shouldn't dismiss that question. We should sort of discuss and have that conversation with that person, and whether, like, why are they asking this question? Are they trying to be defensive, or try to dodge the question of racism toward people of color, or are we trying to actually be constructive and build off of something that includes all of us? And I think that's the most important.
Okay. Olga,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Olga, quickly from you.
Sure, and building on what Kelvin was saying, it goes beyond tolerance and it goes to fluency, right? You have to be comfortable with change and with different people and different environments. And I've been fortunate enough to be so uncomfortable in my professional life that I'm good at it. Like, you can't rock me very easily anymore. And I look at that as a skill. And most people have not developed that because you run away from discomfort. It's natural. So I think people have to sort of check themselves about their willingness to change comes in a very concerted effort to expand their horizons, to be fluent in culture, gender, race, everything. Religion is another hard topic for people. So I'd say make yourself uncomfortable by learning, right? Don't just do the easy thing, do the hard thing. That's what makes you exceptional as a human. And I would challenge people to find that exceptionalism within them and go beyond tolerance to cultural fluency.
Wonderful. That's a great statement. Cultural fluency. Fred, we'll go to you.
I think I go back again to, and I admire you, Olga, for what you just said. And I go back, in order to understand a culture, you need to dive into it. Whether you like that culture or you don't like that culture. There are cultures that you probably do not like at all. And I think this country gives us the opportunity and the access to get into it and dive into it and learn from it. The issue that you might have is for you to, first of all, to accept the fact I want to do it.
Yep.
Become uncomfortable.
Yep.
I'm Jewish, and I had the hardest time when I came to this country because I did not want to look back to learn about Islam.
Yeah.
I learned about it.
Yep.
There are certain things I didn't know. I was told to be afraid of African American when I came to this country. My best friends are African Americans.
Yeah.
I was told to be afraid of the certain group of people in this country. Do not go to the Spanish side. My best friends are Spanish.
Yeah.
So I think, as Olga said, we need to overcome that hump of being uncomfortable and dive into it and learn and educate. And I'm going to go back and make a segue again to schools. One of the, and I keep saying it, and I'm not repeating myself, but again, we need to teach our children from the young age about other cultures, not just by sitting and talking to them, make them integrate, letting them go another culture. Maybe what we should do in this country is, as a part of graduation, they should do a mandatory 1 month service and a community work as a part of the graduation.
Okay.
Let them go to areas like Southeast San Diego. Let them go to Harlem. Let them go to areas that is not worth university enough. But I think one point we're missing also one more thing. The other side also has to be taught about this side.
Yes, you're right.
The other side has to learn about me.
Cultural fluency has to be a two-way street. Yeah.
And
I agree.
the thing is, we talked about prejudice. The prejudice exists in every single minority. Yeah. We Middle Eastern don't like certain groups. Blacks don't like certain groups. I think what we have to be open and accept the fact that it's time to open up and not point finger at each other that I'm better than you. We have to say, hey, we're equal.
Thank you very much, Fred. All right, Alicia and Alicia. You're the last two before Deborah gets mad at me because we're over time. So concisely, you've heard what everybody else has said. What do we have to do? Let's Alicia, Gwynn, we'll start with you and we'll end with you, Alicia Morrell. Alicia, you're on mute. You're on mute. Now.
Okay, I'm making it short and simple. Everyone needs to buy into it first. And then we need to invest into cultural sensitivity with diversity training.
Alicia, okay, good. So cultural sensitivity with diversity training. All right, okay. Alicia Morrell.
I think one of the things that we can all do is practice. So, there are questions that we can always be asking. Who's in the room? Who's not in the room? But I think that to be successful in the workplace, to do that means that you also need to practice that at home. What's the music that I listen to? What are the movies looking like? The ways in which I spend my time in my home. What are the books that I read to my kids? Who are the main characters? Figuring out whether or not those are intentionally diverse spaces and getting comfortable adding more diversity to those things means that you might be more likely to notice that your workplace is not that diverse because you have access to a lot of diverse things that you've intentionally brought into your own home, into your own personal life.
Sure, that's a wonderful answer. So to the panelists, that's the first portion of this. Thank you very much. I'm going to get into some questions for you guys from the audience, but before that, please enjoy this short video that is about to roll right now about our partners.
Diversity and inclusion are a fundamental part of who we are. It's in our foundation, not an add-on, a showpiece, or a box to check. It's in every decision we make. We continually seek out different perspectives, ideas, and backgrounds because they make us stronger, unwavering, uncompromising, united. At Littler, we celebrate everything that makes us human.
All right, thank you. And we are back on. So now for this portion, for all the panelists, the audience has been submitting questions, and what I'll do is I'll try and sum up some of them and we'll have you guys answer. I think Deborah said for this one, we have about 15 minutes. So first question that came in is, we began to change the narrative by changing our words and designations. We're all human. Color has nothing to do with race. We are human. So I think what the question really is how do we get to a point where we are all looked at as, human beings who want the same thing in life. Does any of the panelists want to? I know that's one of those where in a perfect world we live in a colorblind society. The harsh reality is it's not just about color; it's about culture. It's about political perspectives. And so that's the question. Anybody want to try and delve into that? That first one. Is it possible? Well, go ahead, Olga.
So I after I got elected, I went to a women's leadership group. It's called HOPE, HLI Academy. HOPE stands for Hispanas Organized for Political Equality. So I should have done it before I got elected. But anyway, in that, one of the concepts they teach about leadership is that sometimes you just have to listen, and it's not about you and not about dominating a conversation with your opinion, and that you have to learn when to sit it out and just, be a participant that's not active. And it's a hard thing to do, especially if, you're an opinionated person or you have something to add, but to give other people the space. And I think that was years ago I learned that, but I feel like that's what's happening now, where we're talking about Black Lives Matter or talking about racism, and the highlight or the spotlight is on injustice or on the disadvantages that have been imparted on people of color, and those that are most uncomfortable are not the people of color necessarily. And this is an opportunity for them to listen and to not dominate the conversation and sit it out. And that's a leadership tool that works when you're in committee work or trying to do a project. It also works in humanity. And so I have a lot of friends who've said all lives matter, and I said, well, I'm not disputing that, but right now we're talking about Black lives.
Exactly right, yeah,
and let's let them have this airtime because they got stuff to say, and we have to take the role of listening. So I would tell people, learn to listen.
But yeah, that's an interesting point. Some people say, well, you can't get mad at me if I say all lives matter. And I said, I can't get mad at you, but I also stop listening to you because that's, this moment, this isn't about all lives. It's about a specific situation. So Olga, you're absolutely correct. There's a question that is about if you don't live or work or go to school in a diverse area, how can you foster relationships with people of color and to try and gain this education and develop understanding of different backgrounds and races? Fred, you mentioned that you hired a bunch of people that are all different cultures and races, and that's worked. Talk a little bit about what some of the panelists' ideas are on how you get outside your normal bubble, right? And so Olga, we just finished you have a short answer on that one, and Fred and Alicia, you probably have some insight on this. I know Kelvin and I work for big companies, so we can probably say, but who wants to answer first?
I can tell you that, first of all, when we live in a country that is almost impossible to not have that exposure. We live in a country that from your grocery store to your doctor, to your physician, to your dentist, to your jeweler, to your business person, you will face different cultures. And I think what we should do is learn and try to observe, and without hesitation, just grab that culture and open up ourselves. If you really want to and you're open to it, there are ways for you to open up and learn about other cultures. If you live in a bubble that you think that every person around you would be Jewish or Latino or Black or white, then you're going to live in that bubble. Then that's all you're going to see. But when you go to if you come to a store like mine and you see 10 different cultures, you have that opportunity to observe and learn. We live in a society that it gives us that opportunity to learn. And I want to say something in here that in today's panel, it's such an exposure to so many people, to 200 families, hopefully, to see it beyond that. And one of the things is, none of us are holding back. We're saying what it is what it is. And we may be stepping some of people's toes, and some people may not like it, some people may like it. But the fact is, the bubble only exists if you live in that bubble.
So that's good. So Fred, let me go to the next question, because there are some questions that are coming up that I think the panelists will want to answer as well. There's a question about what about the issue of white. Why isn't white a color? Why does the statement of people of color exclude white people? And there's also a question about whether the panel discussion is really about a monologue where everybody's reaffirming their own narrative on race relations. I think that this is something that's come up for the panelists to answer. Is there are those who believe that we are making this a moment about solely people who are not Caucasian, and that we are, and that maybe that we should, that's the wrong approach. Anybody want to talk about, again, there was a question about white as a color, and why is people of color exclude, people who are Caucasian, and why is this discussion seem to be a reaffirming conversation about our narratives on the ills of police interactions or stops. Well, Alicia, I see that you've raised your
Well, if you look at it and you go back in history, whites have always been the dominant. They've always been the dominant culture. Blacks have never been the dominant culture. So that's why you say that, because whites have always been the dominant culture. They've always ran everything. They've had the privileges. So it would be very hard not to say that when they've always been the dominant culture. They've always they've always had the power to oppress. So and they've had that dominance for years. As you look down the line, Black people have never had that. Black people have never had that dominance. So that's why you could say that, why we're not actually picking on whites, but in reality, they've always had the dominance. They've always had the power to oppress. Black people have never had the power to oppress. Black people have never been the dominant culture.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. Alicia Morrell, you're in the employment law space. You probably see some of these disputes amongst, and sometimes in corporate spaces and business spaces, because of promotions and things like that. As Alicia just said, some of this is about African Americans and Latinos in particular saying, "Hey, we want the same opportunities." This isn't about punishing people who are Caucasian. It's about promoting people who represent, who reflect the community, that greater community of San Diego, which is a multitude of cultures. Can you talk a little bit about this question?
Yeah, I think that there are plenty of well-intentioned folks who think, well, everybody gets the same opportunity, and I am colorblind when I make my hiring decisions, or I am colorblind when I make decisions about who gets advanced in the company or what opportunities lead to advancement. And unfortunately, I think that requires you to actually really interrogate the impact of some of the decisions that have been made. If you go back and you look at, well, the last 10 years, who has been promoted? The last 1 year, who all has been hired? And in addition, who all did we bring in to interview? If those trends don't support the contention that diversity and inclusion are values for your company, then you have to look at that, and you have to be very honest with yourself and say, well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe we have had some problems that we're not even aware of, that we're blind to, that have created problems. As an attorney and as a young attorney, I have done a decent amount of job searching, and you will see on any company's website and every law firm's website, diversity and inclusion are really important values. And now you'll maybe even see a banner that says what we're doing to support Black lives on a law firm's website. And then you say, okay, cool, what does your staff look like? And what do the attorneys that you employ look like? And you go to that page that looks like a yearbook, and it's not diverse at all. So you say that it's a value. Where is that? How is that not coming through in reality? Is it because do you have implicit biases about people's backgrounds, about their names on their resumes. What is preventing that from becoming a reality? And I think that that is something that maybe a lot more people are thinking about because of the impacts of what's going on right now. But that if we do not intentionally course correct for that, we will be having conversations about why isn't my workspace diverse forever.
Yeah, you know, and I will say that I appreciated the open and honest question that came up, because that's what this is about. And I'll give you two examples. Like Kelvin, we both work for Fortune 500 companies, and it's not something that's uncommon that we look at the leadership of big companies to see if there are people at the top that look like us, because it's hard to have a conversation about what's affecting us and our emotions and our feelings if you don't understand what us are thinking about and what we are thinking about. And Kelvin, I'll say this. I'll ask you this question because I think you just heard Alicia talk about when you're looking at jobs and you're going to look and see if they reflect. Talk a little bit about that. Is that important to you? And should that be important? Is that the structure reflect the broader community?
I think it's important to see to have role model figures in leadership, but I also think we shouldn't, just because we see a non-diverse leadership, we shouldn't automatically assume that they are not allies to certain minorities, right? Yep. Because then we dismiss a whole group of people, right?
Exactly. Yeah. We shouldn't assume that they don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. But definitely it is helpful, because in my short career, I have definitely looked up to people in leadership that are like me. And I think there's a natural tendency of wanting to see people like yourself in leadership. But we shouldn't assume the bad intention of that structure, but we should definitely challenge why that occurs.
Yeah, I before I go to the next question, which is it's a police question, I will also make this comment to the panelists and people listening. A few years ago, I was approached by the National Association of Women Business Owners, and they asked me to help them with a bill in Sacramento because they had looked at the fact that there were very few women on corporate boards. And I thought to myself, wow, here it is, 2017, 2018, and they're having a conversation about corporate boards. I never really thought about it deeply. I knew that corporate boards were mainly men. And I looked deeper, and it was mainly Caucasian males. And then they gave me a bunch of statistics. Today, California has a law that says all California headquartered companies have to have one female by the end of last year and 2 by the end of this year. And there are people who kind of look at that and go, well, why is that necessary? The best decisions and policy progress is made when you have diverse opinions and voices and thoughts every single time. You only have one set of people making decisions and there's no diversity, then it's not going to be the best policy. Gender diversity, ethnic diversity, perception, thought process diversity always leads to better outcomes. This next question is that comes up is around this movement, this moment. A lot of discussions about defund the police. And Olga, this is a question that probably you can you're married to a police officer and a retired police officer. There's a lot of controversy over this because I think it's the terminology of defund the police. That's not really what the thought of we don't want police departments in most instances, but talk a little bit about this controversy over defund the police and your thought process.
Sure. So this is a challenging area, and I think the term causes alarm for people that maybe aren't fully ready to explore reforming police and law enforcement practices in general. I think it's unjust that we have dumped every societal ill on law enforcement as first responders. When something's going on, whether it's a mental health issue or a crime, and those are two very different things, we call the police. Everybody calls 911. And so officers will show up. And in many cases, we have hiring and diversity challenges within law enforcement, right? There could be more. We should hire more women. Women very rarely get involved in any kind of altercations. They have different de-escalation and coping mechanisms. So even within law enforcement, there are things that we could do to prevent the risk of an interaction turning violent. But we have dumped everything on the police. They deal with homelessness. They deal with somebody stealing your bike, somebody stealing your car, somebody hurting their family member, murder, child abuse, mental health issues. They deal with everything. They're not trained to deal with everything. And they will tell you they're not trained to deal with everything. oftentimes they have, you know, a box of rubber gloves in their trunk, and that's the tool that they end up using most frequently. We need to reform law enforcement to address societal issues with targeted skill sets for the types of things that are being faced in the field by law enforcement. It doesn't mean there's not room for de-escalation, unconscious bias training, making sure that there's a duty to intervene so what happened to George Floyd would not happen. I think if I had been a cop, I would have been more forceful to say, get off his neck, right? Like, that's my personality. But if you understand the structure of rank and protocol and your supervisor, and, you know, whether you're in a senior enough position to do something about it, that mentality and that structure is very powerful. So it's hard to be strong enough to buck that. So I don't believe in defunding the police, but I certainly believe in reforming the police. Everything from the way that they're trained to the types of situations that we send them out into, and quite frankly, how society wants to fund a real response to some of those challenges and not necessarily make it a fully law enforcement response. Like, for example, if somebody has a call for somebody with a mental health issue, why don't the firefighters respond, right? Like, they're paramedics, they know about healthcare, they've got equipment. Everybody loves firefighters. They haven't been tainted, so to speak, as, you know, biased or in any way. And so a firefighter and a social worker, maybe that's a good pairing. But exploring the topic has caused law enforcement supporters and people within law enforcement to feel attacked. And I always said, no, there's room for improvement no matter what your job is. So this is a really good time to talk about those improvements and those societal changes. And in the meantime, there's law enforcement things that need to be fixed, but there's societal issues that go beyond law enforcement that we need to address.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Olga. Well, we have run out of time, and I want to say to the panel, it's been a pleasure listening to each of you. There was a comment in the comment chat section about that said, you know, just if you all look alike, does that mean you all think alike? And I you know, my response would be, I think what you've heard from this panel is that, you know, we are all people of color, but we all have our own opinions and our own thoughts. And I think that's what life really is all about. Is it doesn't matter if you may be, it doesn't matter what color you are. If you are educated on things going on, you're gonna have your own opinion, your own thought, and that's what's key. So to the panel, I appreciate you all. I've really loved hearing your stories. I've loved hearing the passion for this conversation from each of you. And to Deborah Rosen and the board, thank you for giving me this opportunity to engage in this conversation. I applaud all.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you to the panelists. You know, I do want to end with a quick story before I introduce you to Danielle to do a wrap. So Alicia's gonna laugh. Alicia, I've known her for 25 years. Our kids grew up together in Poway. And it's so funny, over the 25 years, we haven't aged a bit, have we, Alicia? But we've had a million dialogues. And Alicia has always shared with me what she went through growing up, you know, from college at Cal Poly Long Beach to San Diego State, and how they divided up by races, and how her and T were treated when they went to the big leagues. And you know, I always heard what she was telling me, but I really never understood it. I heard it, but I didn't think twice about it. My thought was always, how does this happen? It was hard for me to fathom, right? So today, a month ago, Alicia, I saw this stuff on TV and I'm going, oh my God, I get it. So I called Alicia and I said, hey, I get it now, but I didn't really understand when you were telling me. And she said, all you had to do was ask me questions. I was always afraid to ask the questions. And it's so interesting because my kids were always over at your house, and T did a lot of basketball with Whitney, and we just grew up with you, and it was just kind of knew the culture, but we didn't really know. And I think today, if I would have asked more questions, I could have been a better person. And I feel like I'm inclusive, but still, again, I struggle, and I want to thank you for being my friend for so many years, and allowing me to ask and listen and really admit that I didn't get it. So here, 25 years later, it finally hit me in the head like a brick. So thank you for that. So I want to introduce our co-chair of the Emerging Leaders to do a quick wrap. And without further ado, Danielle Aguas, come on.
Thanks, Deborah. We're so honored you were able to join us today for a thought-provoking conversation on a topic that so many of us on the Chamber's Emerging Leaders Advisory Board have been really eager to listen and learn about, even if it means entering discomfort. And I want to thank our amazing panelists for your wisdom and your personal stories. It really was a privilege to hear you share today. And as mentioned earlier, this is a first in a series of webinars that will be held once a quarter, presented by North San Diego Business Chamber. So we hope you'll join us for the remainder of this series. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Be kind to one another, ask questions, and listen more. Thank you.